At the outset of the tale, we witness a foreboding figure seated on his throne, his hands resting upon the skull of his beloved, pondering whether they shall reunite. We are then swiftly shown glimpses of the enigmatic being's history. On the fringes of the Valley of the Dead, Claire Barton, a heroic figure, and sage Dwight Harvelt find themselves persecuted by the very kingdom they once saved by vanquishing the mighty Demon King. Just prior to their impending execution, a priest levels a series of accusations against them, asserting that their souls have decayed and that they are destined to transform into the next demon lords, thus condemning them to the abyss of the Valley of the Dead. Upon hearing this, Dwight's fury surged, and he bellowed vehemently, refuting the notion that they could ever become the next demon lords. He elaborated that there might be a conspiracy afoot against them. Regrettably, Dwight found himself ostracized by the very populace he had saved, branding him as malevolent. Witnessing this, Dwight seethed with rage as he came to the realization that his hands were bound by specialized chains, rendering him powerless to cast spells. Lying on the ground, as Dwight grappled with his emotions, the king approached, his expression sinister, admitting his mistake in hailing them as heroes. He asserted that their transgressions demanded the ultimate price, their lives. Hearing this, Dwight turned his gaze toward Claire, urging her to flee alongside him, emphasizing that together they could escape. Claire, however, contended that their aspirations for a harmonious world meant she must be the one to make the sacrifice, willingly embracing her fate. Undeterred, Claire implored Dwight to escape, reasoning that their pursuers' fear stemmed from their role in slaying the Demon Lord, making him less likely to be hunted. Dwight, upon hearing Claire's plea, silently acknowledged that his desire to flee was driven by the longing to remain by her side and continue living together. Abruptly, Claire intervened in Dwight's contemplation, apologizing for embroiling him in such turmoil and expressing gratitude for his unwavering support. In a swift turn of events, even as Claire uttered these words, Dwight witnessed the executioners impale a spear through her heart. Before he could fully process this grim reality, a spear was thrust into his own heart. Dragged to the cliff's precipice, they teetered on the brink, poised to be cast into the abyss of shadows. As the abyss beckoned, Dwight's gaze locked onto Claire's fading visage, capturing her fleeting smile in her final moments. With a heavy heart, he turned his attention to those responsible for their tragic fate, only to witness their callous laughter intertwining with their own demise. This spectacle led Dwight to question whether this was the world Claire envisioned, casting doubt upon her aspirations for a better reality. As Dwight observed the mocking laughter of the people, tears welled up in his eyes. He was forcibly propelled into the abyss of death, their arrows piercing the air around him as he plummeted. In that fleeting moment, he felt a tenuous connection with the true nature of the world. Having been cast into the abyss, we then witness Dwight's introspection. He contemplates the passage of time since his execution, the numerous times he shrieked, and the duration of his embrace with Claire's deteriorating form. Clasping onto Claire's body, he ponders the reasons behind his presence in the Valley of the Dead, the unsettling decay of his first love in his grasp. In a cascade of self-inquiry, he delves into a series of questions, offering answers as a lifeline to preserve his consciousness. In a sudden revelation, he comprehends that Claire's vision for the world held merit, yet her approach was wrong. Determined, Dwight resolves to carry forward Claire's mission, to establish peace through a more effective avenue, even if it means eliminating those who have deviated from the path. However, he soon confronts his own powerlessness to enact such change. In that moment, Dwight suddenly becomes aware of a continuous haze in the air, filled with harmful miasma. He realizes that this miasma is dangerous for living beings, yet the high undeads carry a lot of it. He chooses to absorb the miasma, but it throws him back due to the intense and prolonged pain, leaving him immobile and speechless. Despite the agony, he persists, determined to see his plan through. As time goes by, he eventually overcomes the pain, managing to absorb all the miasma present in the valley. Upon absorbing the entire miasma, Dwight is flooded with an immense surge of magical energy and chaos, rivaling or possibly surpassing the power of the Demon King he and Claire once confronted and defeated. This infusion also grants him a profound comprehension of his newfound abilities and their potential. Employing these powers, he commands the transformation of every undead within the valley into his own legion, save for Claire, who remains unresponsive to his necromantic influence. With his undead assembly amassed, Dwight's resolve solidifies, leading him to prioritize those accountable for both his and Claire's demise. Utilizing his macabre forces, he orchestrates a methodical ascent from the depths of the Valley of the Dead, a path carved through the very bodies that now serve as his legion. After emerging from the Valley of the Dead, Dwight and his horde of undead beings encountered a squad of Royal Guard knights responsible for safeguarding the valley. At the sight of the undead, the guards were initially stunned, But before they could fully comprehend the situation, Dwight swiftly attacked, strangling one of the guards to death. This brutal act left the remaining guards in a state of shock and terror. The guards immediately attempted to defend themselves by launching arrows at Dwight, only to find their efforts ineffective. While they deliberated their next move, one of the guards fell victim to the guard whom Dwight had previously strangled, now seemingly influenced by Dwight's ominous miasma. As the other guards watched in disbelief, their shock deepened as additional undead emerged from the Valley of the Dead. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of undead, the guards made the difficult choice to retreat, recognizing their inability to combat the advancing horde. Yet, before they could react, the area was swiftly engulfed by a flood of undead pouring forth from the valley. With each guard killed by the undead, they were transformed into ghouls, succumbing to the effects of Dwight's malevolent miasma. Amid this grim scene, Dwight and his assembled horde of ghouls and undead then set their course towards the capital of the kingdom, determined to wreak havoc upon the royal city. While Dwight and his legion of undead advanced toward the royal capital, a scene unfolded in which the king of the kingdom received a report from one of his knights detailing the dire situation. In response, the king urgently instructed the knight to gather all available mages skilled in holy magic. He emphasized the necessity of forming a protective perimeter around the palace, underscoring the importance of preventing the undead from approaching. The scene then shifts outdoors, revealing the knights and mages strategically positioned along the kingdom's walls. They launched a barrage of arrows and magic spells in an attempt to halt the undead's advance. Amidst the onslaught, Dwight erected a shield around himself, recognizing the futility of their attempts to halt him and his relentless horde. In this moment, memories of his own brutal execution and that of Claire flashed through Dwight's mind. This reminiscence fueled his determination to execute a devastating assault, aimed at rendering their futile resistance meaningless. As Dwight unleashed the attack, the formidable wall encircling and protecting the kingdom crumbled, engulfed in a cataclysmic explosion. The valiant knights and skilled mages who had fought to safeguard the kingdom found themselves consumed by flames. Witnessing the extent of the devastation he could wield, Dwight couldn't help but gaze at his own hands in disbelief, overwhelmed by the incomprehensible power he now possessed. As the protective wall crumbled, the horde of undead surged into the kingdom, sparking a wave of pandemonium as every individual scrambled desperately for safety. Amidst the chaos that ensued, Dwight traversed the tumultuous scene, only to have a stone hurled in his direction. Alerted by the sudden impact, Dwight turned to identify the source, finding a man shielding his 2 children while imploring Dwight to stay away, branding him as a demon. These words stirred a memory within Dwight, recollections of the time leading to his and Claire's execution. Despite their efforts to save the people, they were unjustly labeled as demons, a label that seemed to have materialized into reality for Dwight. His reflection was swiftly disrupted by the appearance of a group of knights, positioning themselves before him, bows drawn and arrows aimed. These arrows bore the power of holy magic, a formidable threat to undead creatures. Recognizing the peril, Dwight swiftly invoked a protective spell over the remains of Claire that he carried. Yet, before he could mount a defense for himself, the knights released their arrows in a coordinated assault. The ensuing explosion enveloped the area, leaving Dwight to grapple with the consequences of this holy magic attack. Amidst the tumultuous explosion, Dwight experienced excruciating pain as his physical form gradually disintegrated into particles of dust. However, his soul took an unexpected turn, entering one of the bodies among his horde of undead, a revelation that left him profoundly astonished. It became clear that since he had imbued his magic into every one of his undead subordinates, his ability to switch among them rendered him virtually invulnerable, even if his original body was destroyed. With this newfound realization, Dwight swiftly shifted his focus toward the stunned knights, who were taken aback by his revival. Acting in an instant, Dwight conjured a swarm of skeleton dogs that lunged at the knights, diverting their attention. Seizing this opportunity, Dwight retrieved Claire's remains, relieved to find that his defense magic had successfully shielded them from the onslaught of holy magic. In that crucial moment, Dwight donned fresh attire and made his way toward the castle, unleashing terrifying magical forces that obliterated anyone who dared to obstruct his path. After a long journey, Dwight and his legion of undead finally arrived at the imposing royal palace. As he stepped inside, memories of his previous visits to the palace as a human flooded Dwight's mind. Utilizing his magic, he pinpointed the king's location on the topmost floor, concealed within his chamber. With resolute determination, Dwight led his undead horde up the palace's floors, each step triggering his recollections. As they arrived at the entrance of the king's chamber, Dwight confronted a formidable barrier and a lingering curse. Undeterred, he effortlessly shattered the protective barrier and forcefully kicked open the door. Upon his dramatic entrance, the king was overcome with shock and terror. His gaze fell upon the undead figure that was once Dwight, and he inquired about the intruder's motives and the reasons behind the attack on his kingdom. In response, Dwight's voice took on a menacing tone as he confronted the king, asking if the name Dwight Harvelt rings a bell to him. Upon processing this revelation, the king's countenance shifted to one of astonishment. He countered that it was inconceivable for the undead before him to be Dwight, as Dwight had passed away a decade ago. This revelation struck Dwight like a thunderbolt, making him realize he had been trapped in the Valley of the Dead for a full decade. Nevertheless, refocusing on the king, Dwight affirmed that despite its implausibility, the truth was stranger than fiction. With his command, Dwight set his army of ghouls into motion, directing them to converge upon the terrified king. The king, gripped by fear, beseeched Dwight for an explanation regarding his motives and actions. In response, Dwight elucidated that he had returned from the Valley of the Dead with the intent of bringing peace to a world he deemed corrupted. However, the king vehemently argued against the possibility of someone returning from the Valley of the Dead, prompting Dwight's blunt acknowledgement that the king's belief held little consequence for him. In a pivotal moment, Dwight unveiled the skeletal remains of the hero Claire, accusing the king of falsely branding them as traitors. Dwight passionately contended that Claire, in her pursuit of world peace, had been unjustly condemned to death. The king retorted, asserting that after the demon lord's demise, the world underwent drastic shifts. Heroes, with their immense power, transformed from saviors into potential threats, endangering not only the kingdom but the world itself. The king defended their execution as a measure of self-interest and survival, deeming the heroes' existence perilous. Dwight, incredulous, questioned whether they were executed solely for the kingdom's preservation. The king, with a skeptical expression, admitted to their calculated sacrifice, blaming them for allowing themselves to be conveniently manipulated by the kingdom. Upon hearing the king's callous justification, Dwight's revulsion surged, and he swiftly commanded his ghoulish horde to put an end to the king's life. The ghouls responded without hesitation, violently tearing the king apart. In his agonizing final moments, as he faced his impending demise, the king admitted that perhaps his decision to execute Dwight and Claire had been justified. Following the king's demise, Dwight's focus shifted to a wall upon which he espied Claire's holy sword. Viewing it as a cherished keepsake, he decided to retrieve it. However, as his hand closed around the hilt, an unexpected aura enveloped him, imbuing him with a sense of familiarity as though he had wielded the sword for years. He deduced that his unique miasma had granted him the experiences and memories of all the deceased within the valley, including Claire, along with her sword techniques and skills. Standing before Claire's sword, Dwight contemplated whether it was right for him to make it his own. Yet, recalling Claire's final words to him, he interpreted the sword as a parting gift from her. The scene briefly shifted to show the kingdom transformed into a nightmarish landscape, devoid of human presence. Back in the palace, Dwight approached the royal chair, realizing that his decade-long quest for revenge had reached its conclusion. He recognized it was time to advance to the next phase of his plan. With a menacing air, he seated himself upon the king's throne, symbolizing the birth of his undead realm. As the curtain closes on this grim tableau, Dwight's undead country emerges from the ruins of a kingdom once teeming with life. The scene transitions outdoors, where a man in a carriage abruptly halts on his journey toward the kingdom, his attention captured by an inexplicable dark shroud of mist enshrouding the entire realm. The focus then shifts to the kingdom itself, where Dwight holds a bottle of wine. As he attempts to drink, the liquid passes through him, causing the bottle to slip from his grasp, an unsettling realization that he can no longer indulge in food or drink. Dwight's gaze shifts to the kingdom's landscape, once vibrant with life but now eerily reminiscent of the Valley of the Dead. Reflecting on the consequences brought about by his own actions, Dwight finds himself devoid of remorse, perceiving that this is only the nascent phase of his grand plan. He elucidates that during his time in the Valley of the Dead, he had an epiphany: when evil pervades the world, humanity unites. He recounts the unity that emerged when the formidable demon lord appeared, transcending national boundaries. However, Dwight contends that this unity shattered when he and Claire vanquished the demon lord, as countries and nations resumed their conflicts, disproving their belief in a lasting peace. In a pivotal realization, Dwight concludes that genuine world peace can only be attained when an immortal evil oversees the world. As a result, he resolves to embrace this role, prepared to ascend as the new demon lord, recognizing that the very concept he once opposed is the key to the harmony he envisions. Dwight clarifies that his objective isn't to reduce the world to ashes, nor does he intend to expose his true intentions. Moreover, he remains resolute that he won't allow himself to be defeated by any opponent he encounters. This determination is driven by his goal to perpetually instill fear into the world's consciousness. With these convictions in mind, Dwight charts his course, beginning with the recruitment of a powerful servant, distinct from the other undead. Harnessing one of the acquired abilities from the Valley of the Dead, Dwight amalgamates numerous undead entities into a singular, formidable being. The process triggers a surge of miasma, enveloping the surroundings, ultimately giving rise to a being of great power. This entity emerges, inquiring of Dwight whether he is the creator responsible for its existence. As the entity materializes before him, Dwight's relief is palpable, satisfied that his summoning has succeeded. Sensing the considerable amount of miasma emanating from the entity, he surmises it to be on par with the power of the demon lord he and Claire once defeated. Observing the entity closely, Dwight acknowledges his role as its creator. However, before any substantial dialogue can unfold, the entity initiates an attack directed at Dwight. Dwight's agility and mastery of magic prove instrumental as he gracefully evades and deflects the entity's assault. In response, the entity's excitement is palpable, evident in its laughter. Utilizing its miasma, it manifests wings, confirming its acknowledgement of Dwight as its creator. The entity embarks on a ferocious strike, yet Dwight remains unfazed, recalling his past as a human and his attainment of the title of sage. With his current status as an undead, coupled with his overwhelming miasma, such attacks pose minimal threat. Dwight effortlessly neutralizes the assault, leaving the entity stunned. Undeterred, the entity lauds Dwight's impressive counter and proceeds to unleash an awe-inspiring magical onslaught, summoning destructive lightning that decimates the surroundings. The aftermath leaves almost half of the kingdom in ruins. As the entity revels in its power, its mirth dissipates upon hearing Dwight's shocking response, a reaction that takes the entity by surprise. As the smoke slowly dissipates, the entity realizes that Dwight managed to effortlessly withstand its full-powered attack without any signs of injury or struggle. Stunned by this, the entity stands in awe. In response, Dwight seizes the opportunity to counter, summoning magical blasts and launching them toward the entity. Though the entity narrowly evades, Dwight follows up swiftly with another devastating attack, sending the entity crashing into the ground. As the entity rises, Dwight conveys his preference for conversation over combat. However, the entity's anger intensifies, prompting it to charge at Dwight with unrelenting force. Observing this, Dwight draws hero Claire's holy sword and respectfully seeks permission to utilize the skills she bestowed upon him. Instantly employing Claire's sword techniques, Dwight cleaves the entity in two, prompting its disintegration. Swiftly, before the entity can regenerate, Dwight absorbs its miasma. As the entity collapses, it concedes defeat and beseeches Dwight to end its existence. Dwight counters by questioning why he would have created the entity only to destroy it. The entity, perplexed, seeks clarification, and Dwight expounds that he desires the entity to become his subordinate. While Dwight possesses the power to compel obedience, he seeks the entity's willingness. After a moment of contemplation, the entity, now named Grom, accepts Dwight's proposal. From that point onward, Grom becomes Dwight's subordinate, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their alliance. 3 days have elapsed since Dwight's encounter with Grom. In an office located within the palace, Dwight is busy reviewing documents while undead beings work on clearing the debris scattered across the kingdom from the battle. Suddenly, Grom enters the room with excitement, informing Dwight that he has completed preparing a meal and urging him to join in the dining hall. However, Dwight explains to Grom that he cannot eat or drink. Grom is taken aback by this revelation and promptly apologizes for the oversight. Despite this, Grom enthusiastically offers to assist Dwight with various tasks, including fetching clothes. As Grom continues talking, Dwight places his hand on his forehead in disbelief. Reflecting on the events, Dwight recalls that Grom's past defiance against him has vanished, replaced by a condescending attitude. Dwight sighs and acknowledges that according to Grom, he was impressed by Dwight's goals, leading him to pledge loyalty as Dwight's Demon Lord executive officer. Soon, Dwight emerges from his reverie and informs Grom about his intention to venture outside to gather supplies. He instructs Grom to remain within the castle until further notice. Grom is surprised by this decision and urges Dwight not to waste his time on tasks that Grom can handle. Dwight acknowledges Grom's point with a nod before focusing on more pressing matters. He elaborates that earlier that morning, he dispatched his skeleton birds to the neighboring kingdom's territories, notifying them of his presence. The letters also offer an alternative: if they pledge allegiance to him, he will refrain from invading their lands. Dwight notes that he has established an environment befitting a demon lord and now desires more subordinates with unique personalities akin to Grom's. With this in mind, Dwight returns to his throne, next to which lies an orb concealing Claire's bones. He reflects that despite his current capabilities, he remains unable to resurrect her as an undead. He contemplates whether her soul resists the transformation or if his conflicting emotions play a role in this limitation. Nevertheless, Dwight makes a solemn promise to himself that he will eventually find a way to bring her back. However, just as he begins to delve into these thoughts, Grom suddenly interrupts him with crucial information to share. Grom informs Dwight that the neighboring territory has dispatched their army, rapidly approaching their domain. Grom seeks Dwight's guidance on how to proceed, and in response, Dwight's expression turns menacing as he suggests that in order to establish themselves as a formidable force, they must make an example of their opponents. With this plan in mind, Dwight entrusts Grom with the responsibilities of the royal palace and immediately sets out to confront the encroaching enemies. However, his departure is momentarily halted by Grom, who implores him to wait for a moment. The focus of the narrative moves to the marching army making their way towards the royal capital, where Dwight and his undead forces are stationed. Abruptly, Dwight teleports above them, donning a unique attire provided by Grom prior to his departure. Meanwhile, the perspective shifts again, this time to one of Dwight's skeleton birds, which is suddenly ambushed by an enigmatic succubus. As the succubus peruses the letter carried by the bird, her interest is piqued by the unexpected emergence of the new demon lord. The scene transitions back to Dwight, who flies above the army unbeknownst to them, evaluating their strength. As he gazes down, he estimates their numbers to be around 20,000 and notices they've surrounded themselves with protective holy magic. This revelation leads Dwight to understand the determined efforts of other territories to retake the royal capital. Observing the army's advance toward the capital, he decides to confront them before they reach his now established base. Despite his intention to launch a powerful attack, his hands begin to tremble, surprising him. He composes himself, recognizing the need to fortify his resolve in facing the enemy forces. Dwight conjures potent magic and directs it at the army, only to find his assault blocked by their holy shield, inciting their excitement. Yet, their anticipation turns to shock as Dwight's magic gradually breaches their defenses, culminating in a colossal explosion upon impact. The explosion releases a miasma mist enveloping the area, inflicting gruesome deaths upon most of the soldiers as their flesh and tissues dissolve. Corpses reanimate as ghouls, attacking their former comrades, transforming the field into a gruesome spectacle. Amid this chaotic scene, one soldier glimpses Dwight's menacing presence and flees, joined by others, pursued by the relentless ghouls. However, the pursuit unexpectedly halts, allowing the surviving soldiers a chance to escape. The focus returns to Dwight, who has halted his ghouls to let the survivors flee. He realizes their role in disseminating the news that a dire threat capable of endangering humanity has emerged. The scene transitions back to Dwight's base, situated at the edge of the Valley of the Dead. Suddenly, Dwight materializes using his instant teleportation. Returning to his base, he realizes that when he was human, his teleportation was limited to his line of sight. However, in his current undead state, this ability has greatly expanded. Shifting his attention to the soldiers he transformed into ghouls, he commands them to cast themselves into the Valley of the Dead. As they follow his orders and descend into the valley, Dwight notices his power gradually surging. This leads him to contemplate whether the source of his newfound strength lies within the valley. Nevertheless, he dismisses the thought and instead opts to regularly cast more undead into the Valley of the Dead to further amplify his power. The scene abruptly shifts, revealing Dwight walking amidst the ruins of the royal city. As he traverses the nightmarish landscape, a blend of pain and sorrow fills him. Despite these emotions, he recognizes his actions as a path he willingly chose, harboring no regrets. Moving slowly through the city's desolation, he eventually arrives at his palace, taken aback by the sudden transformation of its outward appearance. Upon entering, he makes his way to the throne, sitting down to contemplate the dramatic change that has befallen his palace. He soon deduces that only Grom, his trusted ally, could have orchestrated such a transformation. Just then, Grom approaches, tears in his eyes. He reveals that he witnessed Dwight's battle against the army through a farsightedness spell and was deeply moved by Dwight's astounding performance. Amid their conversation, Dwight inquires about the alteration of the castle's exterior, to which Grom admits his involvement. Grom explains that he redesigned the castle to suit the Demon King's residence, enhancing its defenses to deter unwanted intruders. Dwight, hearing this, employs magic to inspect the castle's changes and is visibly impressed by Grom's work, particularly the heightened defensive mechanisms that swiftly dispatch unwelcome visitors. Dwight expresses gratitude for Grom's remarkable efforts, leaving Grom exhilarated by Dwight's commendation. Dwight and Grom exchange banter, but their conversation is abruptly halted as they become aware of the presence of a particular group of monsters making their way toward their base. Reacting swiftly, Dwight employs his teleportation magic to transport both himself and Grom to the intruder's location. Arriving at the scene, Grom is taken aback by the overwhelming quantity of approaching creatures. He queries Dwight about their identity, prompting Dwight to share his recognition. He explains that he is familiar with these creatures, as their paths had intersected back in his living days. As the horde of monsters continued their march toward Dwight's base, their advance was abruptly arrested by the earlier encountered succubus, who appeared to be their leader. Witnessing this, Grom turned to Dwight with curiosity, inquiring if he recognized her as well. Dwight identified her as Luciana, clarifying that she belongs to the 4 heavenly kings, subordinates of the former demon lord who has passed away. Baffled, Grom pressed Dwight to explain the notion of a late demon lord. Dwight assured him he'd elaborate later and, in that moment, teleported in front of Luciana to inquire about her purpose in his domain. In response, Luciana posed a question: if he was the new demon lord. Dwight confirmed his new role, which seemed to surprise Luciana. She approached Dwight, but her advance was promptly halted by Grom, who warned her with a menacing demeanor that he would decapitate her if she misbehaved. Luciana's reaction was a mixture of awe and amusement at Grom's threat. However, her demeanor shifted when she detected a familiar scent emanating from Dwight. Gradually, she realized that the new demon lord was, in fact, Dwight the sage who, alongside the hero, had vanquished the old demon lord. Learning this, Grom's anger swells, and he's poised to rush at Luciana for her informal tone towards Dwight. Yet, Dwight interjects, advising Grom to restrain himself, asserting that he'll address the situation. Drawing nearer to Luciana, Dwight exchanges greetings and acknowledges the passage of time. Luciana concurs, recounting their last encounter when the previous hero severed her in half during their battle. Inquiring about Dwight's changed appearance, she wonders if it's due to old age. Dwight clarifies that his altered appearance is a result of the power from the Valley of the Dead. Luciana implores Dwight to guide her and her monster army inside, citing the exhaustion from their journey and the inconvenience of conversing outdoors. Dwight agrees to lead them, prompting Grom's skepticism. Dwight reassures him, explaining that he has no apprehension, as he could obliterate them all if they attempted any treachery. Luciana and her monsters perceive the menacing intent and potent miasma emanating from Dwight, sending shivers through them. Still, Luciana, though taken aback by Dwight's formidable presence, smiles, finding his current incarnation more appealing than his human form. Consequently, they entered the city together. While they explored, Luciana used her magic to shield her army and pointed out to Dwight that the pervasive miasma was overwhelming for even her monsters. Dwight brushed off the concern, noting that the city was designed exclusively for undead inhabitants. They eventually arrived at Dwight's palace, where he specified that only Luciana was granted access, while her army had to remain outside. Inside the palace, Dwight, Grom, and Luciana settled in a room and took their seats. Dwight inquired once again about Luciana's purpose for seeking him out. As Luciana prepared to respond, she picked up on Dwight's wary expression and assured him not to be suspicious, noting their long history. Grom, however, grew furious and vented his frustration, but Dwight advised him to calm down and clarified that while he and Luciana had crossed paths, their relationship had been strictly adversarial, not friendly. Observing Luciana's reaction to his statement, Dwight elaborated that her former demon lord had perished a decade ago, rendering any hostility between them unnecessary. In response, Luciana inquired why Dwight wouldn't consider the possibility of her seeking revenge for the late Demon King. Dwight's reply conveyed a stern warning that if that were her intent, she and her army should be prepared to be transformed into undead beings. This caused Luciana to grow slightly uneasy, and she admitted to jesting, clarifying that her unexpected visit was motivated by her desire to serve under the new Demon Lord. She went on to explain that following the previous Demon Lord's demise, the remnants of his army found themselves overwhelmed by humans. Without their former leader, they struggled to mount an effective resistance. Consequently, Luciana chose a life of seclusion to keep her followers safe from human pursuit, awaiting the emergence of the next Demon Lord. If no legitimate successor arose, she intended to claim the title herself. However, upon sensing Dwight's overwhelming presence, she realized her concerns were unfounded, as he proved far stronger than the former Demon Lord. In light of this, Luciana initiated a conversation about the former hero, mentioning she had heard about the executions of both her and Dwight. In response, Dwight downplayed the significance of the story, suggesting it wasn't a tale worth remembering. Luciana found this amusing and burst into laughter, deriding the humans for their folly in executing those who had fought for their protection. Curious, Luciana asked Dwight why he hadn't eradicated all humans yet. Dwight clarified that despite the events, his ultimate goal of achieving a peaceful world remained unaltered. He explained that while his approach toward that goal had changed, his ideals still drove him forward. He mentioned that he was also striving to honor the late hero Claire's wish for a peaceful world. In response, Luciana revealed that both she and her army desired such a world, expressing their willingness to contribute their strength and technology to serve the new Demon Lord in exchange for a safe haven and the opportunity to live in peace. This piqued Dwight's interest, but before he could respond, Grom beckoned him and requested a private conversation. Apologizing to Luciana, Dwight and Grom entered another room. There, Grom expressed his distrust of Luciana, cautioning Dwight against placing faith in her. Dwight, however, assured Grom that he was well aware of Luciana's capabilities and could handle the situation. He emphasized that allowing Luciana and her army to act independently against humanity would be problematic, so it made sense to welcome them into his domain to align their efforts with his goals. With this decision made, Dwight left, promising Grom that he would count on his strength when the time was right. Grom's excitement was palpable, a reaction that brought relief to Dwight. Returning to Luciana, Dwight apologized for the delay and conveyed his agreement to shelter both her and her army within his domain. In return, he requested their participation in his campaign against humanity, a proposal to which Luciana gracefully assented. Seizing the opportunity, Luciana attempted to employ her seductive charm on Dwight, but Grom intervened, pushing her away and warning her to stay clear of Dwight. Dwight, observing their exchange, couldn't help but feel exasperated by the scene unfolding before him. Several days later, Dwight, accompanied by his undead forces and a portion of Luciana's army, launched an invasion of a city in the northern region of the kingdom. This city's ruler had defied Dwight's initial warning to submit, resulting in the chaos that now engulfed the area. Amidst this turmoil, the scene shifts to the city's lord, who urgently instructs his men to hold off the undead army while he seeks his own escape. But before he can execute his plan, Dwight and Grom appear before him suddenly, leaving him stunned and terrified. As the lord trembles in fear, Dwight's thoughts reveal his disgust for the Lord's willingness to sacrifice his city and disregard Dwight's warning for his personal gain. This prompts Dwight to conclude that such individuals have no place in his new world. While Dwight contemplates his course of action, the Lord launches a barrage of insults at Dwight and Grom, attempting to keep them at bay. Grom's irritation mounts, and he's on the verge of delivering a painful end to the Lord. However, Dwight intervenes, insisting he'll deal with the situation himself. With determination, Dwight seizes the Lord by the neck and releases a dense mist of his miasma, subjecting the Lord to an excruciating torment that culminates in his explosive demise. Having concluded this grim act, Dwight shifts his attention to the Lord's wife, who shields her children. He warns her to submit to him unless she wishes to meet the same fate as her husband. With those words, he departed, accompanied by Grom, and made his way outside the city. There, he explained to Grom that his intention in bypassing the city wasn't to obliterate it, but rather to leverage it as a means to spread his reputation across the world, positioning himself as a significant threat. Regarding the cities he had invaded, his plan was to let them return to their routines untouched by his forces, on the condition that they submit to his authority and obey him. As they exited the city, Luciana greeted them, her astonishment evident at how swiftly Dwight had conquered the entire city. Capitalizing on the moment, Dwight expressed his gratitude for Luciana's assistance, noting that her exceptional army had executed their original plan even more successfully than anticipated. Luciana's response was a simple smile, accompanied by her explanation that she was pleased to have contributed. Taking the chance, she extended an invitation to have tea alone with Dwight sometime. Grom, however, reacted with fury, advising Dwight to decline the invitation, suspecting an ulterior motive. The two engaged in a heated exchange, causing Dwight to develop a headache from their argument. He intervened, urging them to cease their dispute for the moment. Walking away, accompanied by both Luciana and Grom, Dwight mused that this marked the beginning of an all-out war. He foresaw a future where all the territories and cities within the kingdom would eventually come under his dominion. The scene shifts to a room where Dwight, Grom, and Luciana are gathered for a war meeting. Just before the meeting is about to commence, Grom rises and intends to address an urgent matter that requires Dwight's attention. However, Luciana notices Grom's monocle and comments that it doesn't suit him. This remark triggers Grom's fury, and he's on the brink of engaging in an argument with Luciana. Dwight swiftly intervenes to defuse the situation and encourages Grom to proceed with his presentation. As Grom begins, he outlines that despite the majority of territories and cities within the kingdom's borders falling under Dwight's control, a specific small region in the southwestern part of the kingdom is exhibiting suspicious behavior. Upon hearing this, Dwight turns to Luciana and queries whether she possesses any relevant information. Luciana confirms she does, revealing from her investigation that the said country has amassed a significant army with the intention of capturing the royal capital, currently governed by Dwight. Their objective is to use the capital's conquest as a means to expand their influence and dominion. Luciana expresses her concern primarily about the immense quantity of equipment and weaponry amassed by this small country. This suggests the presence of a larger nation covertly supporting them. While Luciana admits she's unsure of the supporting country's identity, she emphasizes the necessity of not underestimating the advancements of the small country. She proposes swift and decisive action against them to curb their progress. With their concerns voiced, Grom and Luciana turn to Dwight to hear his decision. In response, Dwight rose with a menacing gaze and declared that they would invade and conquer the small country, making aggressive moves against them. He further announced that when the country's covert supporter was revealed, they would take action against that nation as well. Grom enthusiastically endorsed the plan and expressed his readiness to initiate preparations. Luciana, similarly motivated, pledged her commitment to assisting in any way she could. With their intentions set, Dwight accompanied Luciana to the city. While strolling, he observed Luciana's army engaged in a mock battle, preparing for the upcoming conflicts. Witnessing their dedication, he felt a sense of pride. Dwight then shared how, since welcoming Luciana's army, he had concentrated the once prevailing miasma exclusively around his castle, enabling her monster army to navigate the city freely. Meanwhile, his own undead forces were securely housed beneath the castle's basement. As he continued his walk, he noticed Luciana's other followers engaged in revitalizing the city's ruins. Amid their efforts, Dwight was taken aback to spot a human among the monsters. Inquisitively, he questioned this presence, and Luciana clarified that these humans served as her slaves, and they had managed to adapt and coexist harmoniously alongside the monsters. Upon learning this, Dwight was taken aback, as he had never fathomed witnessing a scene where humans and monsters coexisted freely, even in his most imaginative musings. Observing this harmonious sight, Dwight felt a profound sense of peace and delight. He resolved that since these individuals were now citizens of his realm, he bore the responsibility to shield them from harm and danger. Walking away, he contemplated the possibility of this harmonious coexistence on a global scale. Yet, he soon realized the unlikelihood of such an outcome. Returning to his palace, he engaged in conversation with the remnants of Claire beside his throne. Their exchange was unexpectedly interrupted by Grom, who declared that the time had come to move forward with their plan. Upon hearing this, Dwight prepared to address his army before marching into battle. However, Grom detected a shift in Dwight's mood and inquired about his well-being. Dwight responded that he was merely lost in thought, revealing the depths of his contemplation and the complexities of his emotions. In light of this, Dwight proceeded to address his assembled army. Upon reaching them, he shared a concise account of his own life journey. He recounted how he had been executed by the very people he had saved following his victory against the previous demon lord. This event, however grim, had paradoxically unveiled the hidden truths of the world to him. He acknowledged the world's inherent distortion, highlighting how everyone was destined to become mere sacrifices for undeserving individuals. Motivated by this revelation, Dwight chose to defy the prevailing current of the world, pledging to stand in opposition to it. He implored his army to unite in strength, supporting him as they collectively confronted those who opposed them. He called upon them to imbue their bodies and souls with a darkness, becoming the embodiment of absolute evil itself. With these resolute words, Dwight posed a question to his assembled troops: did they possess the determination to follow him along this path? Their response resonated with conviction as they erupted in unison, affirming their commitment to follow the new demon lord's lead. Following the impactful speech, Dwight's entire army was brimming with motivation. Grom, observing the scene, appeared to be genuinely impressed by Dwight's ability to handle the situation and rally his troops. In response, Dwight downplayed his role, explaining that he had merely stoked their enthusiasm and kept his true objectives concealed. Grom inquired if Dwight had any plans to reveal his true goals to them, prompting Dwight to explain that even though they were allies, divulging his genuine intentions could risk the leakage of crucial information to the outside world. He further clarified that if his true aims were exposed to humans, his existence as the demon lord would crumble. Grom acknowledged the challenges inherent in Dwight's path, recognizing the difficulties he faced. Nevertheless, Grom expressed his belief that there was no one as kind-hearted as Dwight. Dwight couldn't help but find irony in the situation and chuckled at the amusing twist of events. The scene transitions to a man confined in a jail cell, pondering if any intriguing events would transpire. Swiftly, the focus shifts back to Dwight, who employs an extensive teleportation spell to transport his entire army to the front lines of the small country. As they materialize, they are confronted by the army of the small nation, evident from their tactical arrangements that they were prepared for a preemptive strike. Amidst this tense atmosphere, Luciana inquires if Dwight plans to compel their surrender. Dwight confirms his intent, expressing his desire to conclude the conflict without spilling unnecessary blood. Employing magic, Dwight's resonating voice echoes far and wide, attempting to erode the morale of the opposing soldiers. However, their will remains unbroken, and they launch an initial assault. Dwight effortlessly intercepts their attack. In response, he commands his entire force, both living troops and undead, to retaliate against the enemy's army, sparking an intense full-scale warfare. Gradually, Dwight's forces gain control of the outer region of the small country. Deciding to capitalize on this advantage, they opt to advance further, plunging into the heart of the enemy's territory. Gradually, they managed to advance into the small country's inner territory. As Dwight and his army continued their progress, he shared with Luciana his intention to head straight to the small country's palace. His objective was to search for documents that could potentially establish a connection between the small country and the shadowy instigators of the war, a nation supporting them covertly. During their journey by carriage, Luciana expressed her discontent with the ongoing battle, deeming it dull. She pointed out that even when facing a smaller nation, they should have a formidable warrior capable of opposing Dwight's army. In response, Dwight noted that during his time as a human, only exceptional individuals, such as sages like himself, heroes, or exceptional warriors, could effectively challenge an entire army led by a demon lord. He explained that individuals possessing such extraordinary talent were indeed rare, as such capabilities weren't easily acquired. Upon hearing Luciana's sentiments, she let out a sigh, reminiscing about the days when the previous demon lord's army clashed with the hero and the sage. Reflecting on the past, she commented that Dwight was much more captivating during his human days. In response, Dwight requested that she refrain from addressing him as Dwight. Luciana questioned whether he had discarded his name entirely. Dwight replied that the name didn't hold significant importance, but Luciana asserted that it did matter. He was still Dwight, even in his role as the demon lord. This exchange left Dwight taken aback. Luciana continued, probing whether he had forgotten himself and now saw himself as a mere tool for some greater purpose. Dwight clarified that he didn't have a problem viewing himself as a tool if it was advantageous in achieving his goals. Luciana's response was unanticipated. She playfully pounced onto Dwight's form, stressing that this perspective wasn't right. She encouraged him to open up about his own identity. However, Dwight brushed her off, emphasizing the pressing battle at hand. Luciana persisted, pushing Dwight to promise to value himself more in the future. Resolving to do so, Dwight assured her that he would make an effort. With that assurance, Luciana departed the carriage to join the battle, brimming with enthusiasm. As she flew off, she left Dwight with a final piece of advice: to share his concerns openly if he encountered any difficulties. Dwight pledged to do so if the need arose, and with that, Luciana soared into the fray, eager and ready to contribute. After a while, Luciana relayed to Dwight that the enemy's front line had been vanquished and it appeared they were preparing for a siege tactic. Dwight found this information intriguing and decided to employ one of his abilities to transport his consciousness into an undead body within his palace. He aimed to inform Grom about the ongoing progress of their campaign. Initiating this action, Dwight approached Grom, who was busy tidying Dwight's throne while humming a tune. As Dwight drew closer, Grom was startled and questioned how Dwight had returned to the palace. Dwight then briefed Grom about the positive developments in the battle and shared plans to conclude their conquest of the country the following day. Grom, elated by the news, offered his congratulations and suggested they have a celebration upon their return. Dwight transitioned back to his main body, surveying the situation around him and wondering if the battle had concluded. Just then, Luciana flew over to him, conveying an important update. She explained that resistance had arisen within the country's prison, resulting in the systematic elimination of all the undead forces. This shocking news prompted Dwight to inquire about the scale of the opposition. Luciana revealed that it was a solitary man, a prisoner from before the previous demon lord's conquest, known for his unruly nature and crimes of recklessness. Given the power he exhibited, Luciana surmised that he might be on par with the hero's level of strength. As the prisoner named Henry Blacken unleashed his wild assault upon Dwight's undead army, he soon became aware of Dwight's overwhelming presence and directly challenged him to a one-on-one confrontation. However, before Dwight could react, Henry launched a fierce attack that pierced through Dwight's defenses, causing a massive explosion. The blast left both Dwight and Henry somewhat battered, which seemed to please Henry. As Henry poised for another strike, Luciana, taken aback by his immense power that potentially surpassed even the previous hero's abilities, voiced her astonishment and questioned his identity. In response, Dwight disclosed that the man before them, Henry Blacken, had also been a prominent figure during the previous demon lord's subjugation. He was an undefeated warrior, essentially the closest thing to a demon lord killer. Luciana was visibly shocked upon hearing this revelation. Despite the gravity of the situation, Dwight quickly urged her to move out of the way, as Henry prepared to launch another attack. Dwight managed to counter Henry's assault and retaliated with an attack of his own, which Henry effortlessly dodged. As their intense battle raged on, Dwight made a surprising observation. Henry possessed no magical abilities whatsoever, relying solely on his raw physical strength. Despite this, he managed to keep up with Dwight's attacks, leaving Dwight astonished. Additionally, throughout their clash, Dwight realized that Henry exhibited a remarkable resistance to his miasma, further deepening Dwight's intrigue about his adversary. In response, Dwight implored Henry to cease his assault and presented a proposition. If Dwight emerged victorious in their battle, Henry would have to join his army. Conversely, if Henry won, Dwight would grant him anything within his reach. Agreeing to the terms, Henry stipulated that his victory would earn him command of Dwight's army, stating that after spending a decade imprisoned, he found the idea of waging war against the world quite appealing. Dwight, however, expressed skepticism, asserting that the role of a demon lord required unwavering determination and commitment, qualities he believed Henry lacked. Curious, Henry inquired whether Dwight considered himself fit for his position. Dwight responded affirmatively, stating that no one else could replace his presence. This declaration fired up Henry's determination. However, even with his remarkable physical prowess, Henry was overwhelmed by the display of Dwight's extraordinary magical abilities. Eventually, Dwight emerged as the clear victor, subduing Henry and immobilizing him with chains, confirming his triumph in the bet. Approaching Henry, Dwight declared that from that point onward, Henry was to be one of his subordinates. Henry, displaying no objections, expressed his satisfaction in serving someone stronger than himself. With this, they both departed together, marking the beginning of their new alliance. The setting changed, revealing Henry and Dwight inside the palace of a small country they had successfully conquered. While they were discussing matters, their conversation was interrupted by Luciana. She showcased a group of men under her influence to Dwight. Curious, Dwight inquired about their identity, and Luciana informed him that these men were the ones who had been running the country. With Luciana's control over them, she assured that they could now extract any information they needed. This revelation thrilled Dwight, as it meant they could uncover the shadowy supporters of their cause. Eager to proceed, Dwight introduced Luciana to Henry as one of his new subordinates. Then he turned to Henry and questioned his strong desire to return to the palace after their recent battle. Henry clarified that he sought a particular weapon confiscated from him when he was arrested. He believed the weapon was stored in the palace treasury. Acting on this information, Dwight, Luciana, and Henry immediately made their way to the treasury. Inside, Henry meticulously searched the area, eventually retrieving a bow. He explained that this bow, crafted from the bone and hair of a dragon, was his primary weapon. The reason he was so determined to retrieve it was because of its unique significance to him. Upon learning this, Dwight came to recognize that Henry's true role lay as an archer, despite his exceptional abilities in close combat. As Dwight pondered over this revelation, Henry decided to demonstrate his archery skills. He picked up an arrow and aimed at a target building. With a single shot, the arrow not only demolished the building but leveled it entirely, leaving Dwight astonished. He realized that such a feat couldn't be accomplished through strength alone. Intrigued, Dwight requested an arrow from Henry. After receiving the arrow, Dwight infused it with a hint of his miasma and then directed it towards another building. However, the result was far more intense than expected. The arrow not only razed the building but nearly obliterated half of a mountain situated behind it. This shocking display left Henry and Luciana in disbelief. Dwight, upon witnessing the overwhelming outcome, let out a sigh of disbelief, explaining that he had intended to simply have a bit of fun. The setting transitions to a small town situated near the territory recently conquered by Dwight. The town's residents began to hear explosions and speculated whether the demon lord had finally launched an invasion. Consequently, the soldiers implored the civilians to evacuate the city promptly. Some suggested surrendering in hopes of sparing their lives, to which the soldiers replied that only hell awaited them if they didn't resist. The scene then shifts, showing a soldier hurrying to his younger sister, Nina. He urgently instructs her and others to leave the territory without delay. Curious, Nina inquires about his own safety, and he responds that he has no choice but to stay and defend the territory as a soldier against the demon lord's army. In reply, Nina expresses her concern, believing he might perish due to his perceived weakness. Her brother acknowledges his vulnerability but emphasizes that if they manage to buy enough time, a hero similar to the one from a decade ago might arise to confront the demon lord. With determination, he assures Nina that he won't die, so she shouldn't worry, as he is committed to safeguarding her until the next hero emerges. The scene transitions to the demon lord's base, where Dwight, Henry, and Luciana stroll through the streets en route to Dwight's palace. During their walk, Henry becomes astonished upon seeing the entire city, once the royal capital, transformed into a haven for monsters. He remarks that he appreciates what he's witnessing. Luciana interrupts, questioning whether he doesn't feel anger seeing a city once thriving with humans now overrun by monsters. In reply, Henry asserts that he doesn't concern himself with races, and if he did, he would never have chosen to join the Demon Lord's army. This statement piques Luciana's interest, and their camaraderie begins to grow, much to Dwight's satisfaction. They eventually arrive at Dwight's castle, and Henry expresses surprise at the outward design. He asks Dwight if this style is his preference, and Dwight promptly clarifies that it absolutely isn't. At that moment, they stepped into Dwight's castle, and as they entered, they were promptly greeted by Grom, who displayed immense excitement at the sight of Dwight. However, Grom's expression shifted as he noticed Henry, prompting him to inquire about Henry's identity. Henry introduced himself as Dwight's new subordinate. Grom's mood turned sour upon sensing the tone in Henry's introduction. This led to an exchange of banter between Grom and Henry. While observing them, Dwight chose not to intervene, as Grom's reactions were more moderate compared to when he met Luciana. Furthermore, Henry's amiable personality played a role in maintaining the situation. Amidst the banter, Henry and Grom decided to settle their dispute through an arrow shooting contest, aiming to determine the superior subordinate. Luciana and Dwight observed this with a mix of amusement and exasperation, marveling at the playful, childlike behavior exhibited by both Henry and Grom. After 50 days since Henry joined Dwight, he assumed the responsibility of training the monsters within Dwight's army to enhance their combat capabilities. With his guidance, the army experienced remarkable strength improvement, facilitated by his guardian. Under Henry's exceptional leadership, the army secured numerous victories in battles, to the extent that they began to respect and trust him even more than Dwight, the Demon Lord himself. This brought immense satisfaction to Dwight, as it reminded him that despite his eternal nature, he wasn't invulnerable. Recognizing the danger of becoming overly arrogant, he understood the importance of bolstering his army's strength to its fullest potential. The focus returns to the region near the small country, currently facing an invasion by the Demon Lord's army. Amidst this turmoil, the soldier we mentioned earlier witnesses his sister, Nina, brutally slain by Dwight's ghouls and undead forces. He fights his way through the relentless undead army, eventually discovering his sister in a grisly state, deceased and transformed into a ghoul. In that harrowing moment, the soldier is forced to take his sister's life. Overwhelmed by sorrow, an extraordinary amount of aura envelops him, culminating in a massive explosion that obliterates a significant portion of the surrounding undead forces. In this heart-wrenching scene, the soldier, now evolved into a hero, rises with his sister's lifeless body in one hand and his sword in the other, resolute in his determination to avenge her death and defeat the Demon Lord. The perspective shifts back to Dwight, who is suddenly informed by Grom about a momentous development, an emerging hero. Dwight's expression remains unchanged, and he calmly remarks that it was only a matter of time.